All right. Good afternoon and welcome. If everyone could go ahead and please take your seat, we'll just wait on a little bit more people to sit down and we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, perfect. Good afternoon and welcome. I am Gabriel Ronquillo. I am the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute's Programs Manager. Before we start today's trade symposium, here are a couple of things that I want to share. We ask that you help share the speaker's point of views and share yours as well. So please go ahead and follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X at the CHLI. After the panel discussion, there will be time for Q&A. We do have two panel discussions. After each one of them, we will have a Q&A. So if you do want to ask a question, please stand up, let us know your name and organization. And on each of the tables, there's a microphone. Please go ahead and click the button to the right with the little person on it, and it will turn on to ask a question. The discussion, including the Q&A, is live streamed and will be uploaded to our YouTube. You can follow us at the CHLI as well on YouTube. And now to kick off the program, I'll go ahead and pass it on to CHLI President and CEO, Marianne Gomez Horta.
Thank you, Gabriel. Good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes. Happy Hispanic Heritage Month. So welcome to the 13th Annual Trade and International Affairs Symposium. This is our contribution to Hispanic Heritage Month. The Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute is the premier organization founded by members of Congress to advance the Hispanic community's economic progress with the focus on social responsibility and global competitiveness. Founded in 2003, CHLI is a 501c3 nonprofit and the only bicameral, bipartisan, Hispanic-led and Hispanic-serving nonprofit in Washington, D.C. CHLI is dedicated to fostering a broad awareness of the diversity of thought, heritage interests, and views of Americans of Hispanic and Portuguese heritage. I would like to start by recognizing a few people before we start the discussion. The Board of Directors of CHLI. Some of them are already here, and as they come in through the afternoon, I will pause to introduce them as well. The Board of Directors also kindly, as I refer to as my bosses, so I always have to introduce them. So I also want to start with Congresswoman, the Honorable Ileana Ros-Layton, our Chairwoman, Sarah Decker from Walmart, Javier Gamboa from the Business Roundtable, Jennifer Zinicola from the Coca-Cola Company, and I think that's it for right now. So we have our global leader interns as well with us. As you can tell, they're the A students because they're sitting in the front row. So if the interns can please stand and be recognized. They are here in Washington, D.C. Thank you. They are here in Washington, D.C. for one semester. They began their internship, what was that now, 2 weeks ago? 3 weeks? Okay. So they're on the Hill for 2 months. And then after the 2 months, they intern in a government relations, federal affairs office here in Washington. It's the opportunity to expand on that diversity of thought that we really focus on and balance the public perspective and the private as well. So if you're interested in the internship program or you know somebody who might be, please let us know. But more than anything, ask one of them. They can tell you all about it. Please go to the website as well for more of the information. I also want to thank our sponsors for the symposium today. UPS, 2042 Media, Amazon, Pfizer, and Walmart. And a very special thank you to the Business Roundtable. As I already mentioned and introduced, Javier Gamboa is a representative from the Business Roundtable on the Board of Directors. But please join me in a round of applause for all of the sponsors. Thank you. I also want to take the time to thank the whole team who helped put this together. As you can imagine, and you know, putting something like this together takes quite a bit of time, but we also incorporate not just the staff and interns, we incorporate board members and advisory council members. This truly is a collective effort in everything that we do at CHLI. So I want to quickly thank Gabriel, Angela, Nicole, Tia, Maite, Emily, Bruce, Andres, Sofia, Maya, Emma, Elizabeth, and Paola. Muchísimas gracias. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Sarah Decker. She is the Senior Director of Federal Government Affairs at Walmart and manages Walmart's technology, energy, and sustainability policy in Congress and in the administration. Prior to her work at Walmart, she served on Capitol Hill for about 11 years. I don't know if that makes you a veteran, because you know there's like a time span there. She also takes the time to meet with CHLI interns, which we love. She has hosted cafecitos as well with members of Congress on our board. And she's also taken the time to introduce interns and alumni, not only to her journey, but also to the journey of other colleagues at Walmart. So a round of applause. Sarah, the podium is yours, dear.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank all of you for joining us here today. It's my pleasure to give welcome remarks on behalf of the CHLI Board and Advisory Council and as the chair of the Trade Symposium. For the past 12 years, CHLI has held this Trade Symposium to emphasize the importance of the U.S. Hispanic community's contributions to the global economy and the importance of trade for our hemisphere's diplomatic relations and global competitiveness. Today, you will hear from thoughtful discussions with members of Congress, government officials, and corporate leaders. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our host today, CEO of the Business Roundtable, Josh Bolton.
Sarah, oh, you left out some of my introduction here. Thank you for being here. Bienvenidos. Welcome to the Business Roundtable. We are honored to, again this year, co-host CHLI's Trade and International Symposium. For those of you who don't know us, I hope you do know us, but if you don't, and I'll talk especially to the young people in the first row, Business Roundtable is an organization of 225 CEOs of America's leading companies. You can see a lot of their signatures out there. Congratulations to the folks from Coca-Cola who found their boss's signature out on the wall. Not everybody is able to do that. Oh, there we are. And our job here at the Business Roundtable is to advocate for strong economic policy here in the United States. Like CHLI, we advocate for bipartisanship, and we value free enterprise. And our job is to try to promote the public policies that affect all of our member companies, that promote growth in the United States, and create more opportunity for everybody here in America. Critical among those policies we advocate for are pro-growth international trade policies that spur job creation, that expand opportunity, and that strengthen America's global competitiveness. That's going to be especially true over the next couple of years as the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement comes up for a review. And Business Roundtable will be all in on promoting a successful review that leaves in place all of the critical elements of that agreement that's so important to all three of the member companies and really to the economic health of the whole Western Hemisphere. I'm delighted that CHLI is focusing on trade at this moment for precisely that reason. There are far too few voices in our public square these days speaking out in favor of pro-growth trade policy and speaking out in favor of America engaging with the world, especially with the Western Hemisphere. And so we're delighted to have an opportunity to host this forum that I know is going to take up those themes in particular. And we're especially proud to have an opportunity to partner with Chile. Personally, I'm even more proud to have an opportunity to introduce our next speaker. She was the first Hispanic woman elected to Congress. She served there for 30 years, where I was briefly a constituent. She was great at being a constituents member of Congress. But more importantly, I had the opportunity to work with her in her role, in her leadership roles, especially in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, but always a strong voice for good sense, for bipartisanship, and for good policies that are going to grow the pie for everybody in this hemisphere. Please join me in welcoming to the stage former Congresswoman Ileana Ros-Lehtinen.
Okay, not speech, just a few. Thank you so much. Thank you, Josh. Muy buenas tardes. Thank you, Josh, for making this beautiful facility available for Chile again. As you heard, I'm Ileana Ros-Lehtinen, and I'm honored to give you another welcoming set of remarks to the 13th annual Chile Trade and International Affairs Symposium. A special thank you to our host, Business Roundtable, for welcoming us to their beautiful offices today. Love that view, almost as beautiful as Miami. Chile is near and dear to my heart. 21 years ago, our chairman emeritus, the Honorable Lincoln Diaz-Balart, led the establishment of this incredible organization that has now funded millions of dollars worth of leadership development programs and is proud of its over 300 internship and fellowship alumni. The Trade and International Affairs Symposium is always held during Hispanic Heritage Month, my favorite month, to highlight and celebrate the significant and impactful contributions of Hispanics to the global economy. This year's theme is strengthening business relationships in the Western Hemisphere. We will hear from respected business leaders regarding growth opportunities through trade agreements. Hispanics, as we all know, we're currently the largest minority in the United States, and we contribute millions of dollars to the U.S. economy. Hispanic-owned businesses can be found across a variety of industries, including tech, retail, and the list goes on and on. Our Western Hemisphere neighbors are critical to trade partnerships, making our presentation here today very timely. So welcome once again to the 13th Annual Chile Trade and International Affairs Symposium, and a special shout out to Eddie Acevedo, the second in command at the Wilson Center, and the former Middle East Subcommittee and North Africa Staff Director of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Bienvenido, Eddie, te quiero mucho. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Enjoy the show.
I'm just going to pause for a photo, and then I'll introduce the Undersecretary.
Josh.
All right, let me see here. Where is, the Undersecretary is on her way, so shall I wait till is she close? Yes. She's close, okay? So let me go ahead and give the remarks and the introduction, and then if I need to, I'll kind of do a little shorter version when she gets here. So Marisa Lago was sworn in as Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade in 2021. She leads the federal government's efforts to assist American businesses entering or expanding into international markets, enforce fair trade policies, and this includes promoting travel and tourism to the United States and U.S. products and services overseas, provides in-depth trade analysis as well, and develops strategies that will shape the future of international trade. She also engages in commercial diplomacy across the globe. Undersecretary Lago has a distinguished career in public service with expertise in international markets, trade, financial regulation, and enforcement. Before joining ITA, she led the New York City of Planning and the City Planning Commission. In the Obama-Biden administration, she served in the Department of Treasury as Assistant Secretary for International Markets and Development. Undersecretary Lago has also served at the Boston Redevelopment Authority for the City of Boston, the Empire State Development Corporation, and the Office of International Affairs for the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. When she comes back upstairs here, we'll reintroduce her, very short, brief introduction, but please just be patient with us for a couple of minutes while we wait for her. Thank you. Good afternoon again, everyone. Please join me in a round of applause for our Undersecretary Lago. Muchísimas gracias.
Pues muy buenas tardes. Es un placer estar aquí con ustedes esta tarde. And warm thanks to the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute for hosting me today. I was really thrilled to receive your invitation and to know that you are able to bring together such a dynamic group of Hispanic American leaders. I'm a proud member of the Spanish diaspora, and so I feel such a personal connection both to the organization, to Hispanic Heritage Month. My family came to the United States, as so many do, in pursuit of economic opportunity and security, fleeing the violence and poverty of the Spanish Civil War. Hard to imagine when one sees Spain today as a proud member of the European Union, but in the 1930s, a very, very different situation. And whether it is through lengua, cultura, or familia, our community shares such strong ties across generations and also across a diverse number of geographies. And so with a nod to a focus on today's topic of international trade, I would want to focus on how international trade unlocks tremendous economic opportunities. I'm from the Commerce Department and we love statistics. So to give a sense of the scale, over 5 million Hispanic-owned US businesses contribute over $800 billion to the US economy, and that is every year. So no matter which sector you represent, each of you here today recognizes the power of economic opportunity to transform the lives of individuals, families, entire communities, and I would go so far as to say our nation. For my part, this recognition has guided my career, bringing me to the organization that I've been privileged to lead for almost 3 years, the U.S. Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration, or ITA. For those who have not previously interacted with ITA, we have a first-rate team of about 2,300 trade and business experts. They're located in over 100 locations across the United States, but also in 80 international markets around the globe. Our core mission is to advance inclusive economic prosperity. And increasingly, we have been focused on our role in strengthening U.S. economic security because we know that economic security is an integral dimension of national security. So what does this mean in practical terms? Our bread and butter is promoting U.S. exports, physical goods, of course, but also intangible services from ICT, information and communications technologies, to financial services, to travel and tourism, to education. And that's just a few examples. So in particular, we promote U.S. competitiveness by advocating on behalf of U.S. businesses when they're bidding for international projects. Also, through our regular engagement with foreign governments, we proudly tout the vibrant U.S. private sector and its high-quality, competitive products and services, and across a huge array of sectors. Now, here at home, ITA is also charged with attracting FDI, foreign direct investment, into the U.S., building on our country's ranking as the top destination for FDI. Now, even though we have held this title, top destination for FDI globally, for 12 straight years, we know that we have to earn it every single year. Now, another valuable resource that ITA provides is extensive industry data and analysis for decision makers, whether the decision makers are executives, frontline business folks, policymakers. We offer detailed information about the latest market trends, top export markets for specific industries, and about potential supply chain vulnerabilities. And this information about supply chain vulnerabilities is especially relevant in the world in which we live today, an era of evolving geopolitical tensions and also, unfortunately, the risk of economic coercion by other countries. Now, we also very proudly enforce international trade laws and agreements. We believe it's essential to level the playing field for U.S. businesses and workers. And we are proud to take enforcement action against unfair trade practices. And they can range from preferences for state-owned enterprises in other countries or excessive subsidies, which are now increasingly transnational in nature. So overall, ITA's wide-ranging work brings huge economic benefits to U.S. businesses, workers, and communities. So far this year alone, we've supported over $125 billion worth of U.S. exports, advocacy wins, and inflows of FDI. And this has contributed to the creation of over 450,000 U.S. jobs. Another statistic, this year alone, we've served nearly 78,000 U.S. businesses, 80% of which have been micro, small, or medium-sized enterprises. Now, in recent years, we've been laser focused on adapting to new geopolitical realities. We are laying the groundwork to strengthen and diversify U.S. supply chains, especially for critical and emerging technologies like semiconductors. We are expanding our trade and investment relationships with like-minded countries, deepening cooperation across priority sectors, from AI to clean energy solutions. The commercial opportunities are especially vast here in our hemisphere, in the Americas. Last year, we traded $1.9 trillion worth of goods and services in the Americas, and that is more than any other region in the world. So across Latin America and the Caribe, ITA has offices in 14 countries: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, la República Dominicana, El Salvador, Guatemala, Guyana, Honduras, Mexico, Panama, Peru, and Uruguay. And we're proud that last year we were able to add 2 new offices, one in Africa and one in Georgetown, Guyana. Now, to give you a sense of the breadth of our engagements across the region, just last week, I joined Brazil's stellar Secretary of Foreign Trade, Tatiana Prazeres, to co-chair the 22nd hosting of the U.S.-Brazil Commercial Dialogue. This longstanding dialogue or this longstanding platform for cooperation makes progress across a really impressive and wide-ranging agenda. It includes the digital economy, supply chains, intellectual property protection, good regulatory practices, climate, gender, and labor practices. Going back to June, I was honored to join the U.S. presidential delegation, which was led by U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, another proud member of our Hispanic American community. I accompanied him to the second inauguration of El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele. We met with President Bukele, and we were able to discuss opportunities for cooperation on economic issues, including his administration's focus on economic development, plans for nationwide 5G telecoms coverage, and his goal of transforming El Salvador into a regional tech hub. One of the most visible symbols of the evolution that has taken place in El Salvador is the fact that there is a giant lit up external Google sign on one of San Salvador's tallest skyscrapers. And this is a visible manifestation of Bukele's government's $500 million agreement with this U.S. company. That same week, I traveled to Guatemala, where I was the U.S. Commerce Department's first senior official to meet with key members of President Bernardo Arévalo's new administration. And this meeting took place just after the completion of the first 100 days of the administration And so we were able to discuss their top commercial and legislative priorities. And it spanned from anti-corruption initiatives, which have been the bane of so many countries, but also to a proposed first ever competition law, which is something that the U.S. business community has long sought in Guatemala. Earlier this year, I traveled to Argentina, and there I met with the newly installed President Javier Milei's administration. The timing was really good because they had only been in office for a handful of months, and they were beginning to think about what are the needed economic and business reforms that would have to be made in Argentina to attract more foreign capital. From there, I went on to Uruguay and signed a sweeping memorandum of understanding between our countries that would deepen our collaboration on the technologies of the future: AI, telecoms, biotech, clean energy, and semiconductors. I list these as the tip of the iceberg because, as I said, we have teams in over 100 global locations, but I want to emphasize I have global responsibilities, yet these are the travels that I have taken this year just in this hemisphere. That's the priority that we're placing. So turning now to ITA's resources and services that are more targeted for Hispanic American businesses, we launched GDEI, the Global Diversity Export Initiative, with the goal of making sure that the benefits of international trade and development are broadly shared across the U.S. GDEI leverages national chambers of commerce and a wide array of business associates to ensure that ITA's trade missions, our events, and our business counseling services are able to reach businesses from all communities in the U.S., regardless of their size or of their location. We launched ITA's Building Bridges to Global Markets program, and what we do is, from headquarters, we send out a team of trade experts to communities across the country where they provide tailored advice to local businesses about exporting to global markets. And this ranges from: how do I identify and vet potential partners in another country? How do I comply with international regulations when I want to export? And importantly, how do I access finance? And rather than expecting small businesses to come to DC, we send the pros out to the communities, meeting the small business owners where they live and where they work. It was actually for me a personal pleasure to speak at one of these Building Bridges events earlier this year, which we held in very close coordination with the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Another initiative that I want to highlight is that last year we established 7 new rural export centers. Previously, we'd had 1. And so in 1 year, we went from 1 to 8, recognizing that the needs of businesses in rural communities, from Boise, Idaho to Midland, Texas to Charleston, West Virginia, are very different and varied, and we needed to have people on the ground focusing on local businesses. So looking ahead, in mid-November, ITA is going to lead a trade mission to the Caribe, focusing on minority-led small and medium-sized U.S. businesses. And this will be under the banner of our Global Diversity Export Initiative. And what we will do in the countries that we visit is offer targeted one-on-one meetings with potential buyers, distributors, and business partners. I sometimes joke that I run the world's largest business-to-business dating service. And looking even further ahead, out to April of 2025, every year ITA has one huge annual trade mission and business development forum, and it rotates around the world, and countries are very interested in attracting it. In April 2025, you're going to want to be in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We will bring over 100 US companies to Sao Paulo, and then we'll have spin-off trade missions to Argentina, Chile, Colombia, and Uruguay. I would urge any company that is interested in these markets to consider joining. And I'll note that the trade mission to the Caribe registration closes this Friday. So if you're interested, now's the time to sign up. So I hope I've given you a little bit of a flavor of what it is that ITA does and why it is that I think I have the single best job in the federal government. Thank you.
Before you head out. Let's do right over here, Rodney. Close to the shop. Another round of applause for the. And you heard of whoever wants to sign up, that Caribe trip is Friday is the deadline. So, so thank you all. Next, I'd like to introduce one of our congressional board members, Congressman Carlos Jimenez of Florida. The congressman represents the 28th Congressional District. He was first elected to Congress in 2020. He serves on the House Armed Services Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, and the House Election Committee on Strategic Competition between the U.S. and the Chinese Communist Party. He is the first career firefighter paramedic to ever serve in Congress. So please join me in a round of applause for the congressman, and I think he's going to be coming in from that door. Right, Ray? That door? Ahí viene? 1, 2, 3. Okay, let me go get him. All right. Congressman Carlos Jimenez.
Good afternoon, everybody. How's everybody doing? Oh, okay, that well, huh? Okay. Hi, my name is Carlos Jimenez. I am a congressman from the state of Florida. I represent Florida's 28th congressional district. That is the really boring city of Miami and the Keys. Yeah, I have a really boring district. I love my district. I've been a resident of Miami for 64 years. Yeah, I'm not going to tell you when I got there. And I love it. I love Miami. I love South Florida. And I also love now representing, the Keys. Prior to being a congressman, I was the mayor of Miami-Dade County for about 9 years. Prior to that, I was a commissioner with Miami-Dade County for about 7 years. Prior to that, I was a city manager of the city of Miami for about 3 years. And prior to that, I was the fire chief of the city of Miami for about 9 years. So a lot of people, oh, fire. Yeah, I am a firefighter. That's what I am. And somehow I just find myself can't get away from that profession. I'm always trying to put out fires all over the place, whether they be real or generated. And I see that one of my predecessors in the back room, Ileana, we love you. Yeah. We need you back. All right. Come on back. Anyway, I want to talk about trade. And so it's an honor to join the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute to discuss a topic that is fundamental to the prosperity of our nation and the success of business, and that is trade. Trade isn't just an abstract concept, it's the lifeblood of our economy, particularly for the state of Florida, which thrives on its ports, its international connections, and central position in the Americas. As a matter of fact, there was a survey done some time ago with Latin American businessmen and women, and they asked them, what's the best place to do business in Latin America? And they said, Miami. That's because Miami, the laws, we protect you, the environment, it's easy to get to. We speak multiple languages. We speak the language of South America. And it's also really, really close to the United States. So that's why it's so popular. So let me be clear. Trade is not just beneficial for large corporations or global conglomerates. It touches everybody, from small business owners in Miami who export specialty products to Central and South America, to the high-tech firms that partner with companies in Europe and Asia, to the farmers in the heartland who send their goods overseas. Trade expands markets. It drives innovation. It creates jobs right here at home. In fact, nearly 40 million jobs in the United States are directly tied to trade, and many more are supported indirectly. When we look at the Americas specifically, we see immense opportunities. The countries of Latin America and the Caribbean represents some of our closest and most important trade partners. We share not only geographic proximity, but cultural and economic ties that date back not just decades, but actually centuries. Our ports and trade routes, especially in Florida, are gateways to that region. Strengthening these ties is key to growing our economy and reinforcing our leadership in the Western Hemisphere. Now, when we talk about opportunities for growth, we can't ignore the importance of trade agreements. These agreements should level the playing field for American businesses and ensure that our products, our ideas, our innovation can compete on fair terms. Look at the success of USMCA, our agreement with Canada and Mexico. It has modernized our trade relationships and unlocked new potential for workers and companies. But we must also think bigger. And our goal, and bigger with our global competitors, particularly Communist China. They're actively seeking to deepen their influence in Latin America and beyond to weaken our national security. And I've seen this firsthand when I travel on Codels down into Latin America. And if you haven't been there, lately, you're going to see a lot of Chinese influence down in Latin America. We can't afford to sit back and allow others to dictate the rules. The United States must lead. We must be strategic in forging new trade partnerships, strengthening old ones, and opening up new markets for our American businesses. Luckily, myself and my colleagues on the Select China Committee compiled a set of 150 policy recommendations to help win the economic competition between the CCP and the United States. These policy recommendations include reauthorizing and making smart reforms to the Generalized System of Preference, or the GSP. While the United States may not be able to offer the same terms as China's Belt and Road Initiative, what we can do is offer free and fair trade between our markets. It's my opinion that when presented with these choices, countries will choose the United States every time. The world is waking up to the CCP's mafia-style business practices, but the world still needs an alternative. And I've been down there, and they're saying to me, hey, we've been offered this by China. We want the United States to participate in this port agreement, or a new port, or constructing this airport. But the United States has sadly ignored our region, our hemisphere, for far too long, and they're making strides. And while they want to deal with us, China may be the only alternative. And so when you put yourselves in their shoes, they only have one alternative. They want to develop their country. They want prosperity for the citizens, and there is no alternative. The United States has to be that alternative. We have to step up to the plate. We cannot allow our greatest global competitor to dominate our hemisphere. And I'm not saying dominate, I'm saying, participate in the way, and yes, then they try to dominate it wherever they go. They can't. We have to be good neighbors. We need to have a strong Central and South America in order to produce the things that we need that are now being produced far, far away in Asia. And so we have seen firsthand how trade impacts businesses right here in our hemisphere, from the vibrant small businesses in my district in South Florida to the major global corporations that call our state home. International trade is essential to their success. Florida is a hub for logistics, and it's also a hub for aviation and international finance because of its roles in global trade. The result is more jobs, more investment, more economic growth for all of us. Of course, the benefits of trade extend far beyond just the dollars and cents. Trade builds partnerships and trust between nations. It fosters innovation by connecting different markets and allowing for the exchange of ideas and technology. It strengthens our ties with our neighbors and promotes stability in our hemisphere. But we must also be mindful of the challenges ahead. And the main challenge ahead is China. And the main challenge ahead for us, the United States, not only in the world, but especially in our hemisphere, is China. And they're making tremendous strides here. Global supply chains are more interconnected than ever before. All you have to do is see what happened during the COVID pandemic about the importance of supply chains. And we must be resilient in the face of disruptions. As we look ahead, the next administration and Congress should prioritize and needs to prioritize strengthening these supply chains, either domestically or through nearshoring and friendshoring. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that we need to incentivize American companies to come back to America, and have incentives for those companies to come back to America. Or if it's not profitable for those companies to come back to America, then maybe we should incentivize them to go into our neighbors, into Mexico, or into, not Venezuela now, but maybe Colombia, Peru, Brazil, Argentina, et cetera. In other words, strengthen our own hemisphere, bring back those supply chains to our own hemisphere. And it really has a twofold, purpose. Number one, it ensures our supply chain can't be cut off in the future if we have some kind of a conflict or somebody wants to basically blackmail us, okay, extort us for some critical mineral that or supply that we need. We need to have that here at home or near our home. But it also improves the quality of life of the people in Central and South America. And that's something that is definitely something that we in America should be looking to. Is how can we improve the quality of life of not only the people in the United States, but everybody in our hemisphere. And we all benefit from that, and we should all benefit from that. I believe the future of America's economy is bright, and trade will continue to be a critical engine of growth, but it's up to us, leaders in government, business, and communities, to ensure that we seize these opportunities and keep America competitive on the global stage. And we need to. We need to make sure that we are competitive in the global stage. We need to make sure that we help our neighbors. We help this hemisphere, not only with trade. I'm going to come off trade for a second. We need to also be the champion of democracy in our hemisphere. There's far too many people in our hemisphere that are living under dictatorships, and they're not free. We as a nation, we need to do everything possible to see how we can help those peoples that are crying out for freedom, and believe me, that's what they're crying out for, freedom, attain that freedom, and that this hemisphere will be known as the hemisphere of democracy. This hemisphere will be known that we don't need any dictators in our hemisphere. We need a democratic hemisphere. And they don't have to be friends of the United States as long as they're democratic and then the people actually choose their own government. The United States needs to be the leader in that. We need to be the champion of that. And when we do that, we can turn enemies into friends, and we can all prosper as a hemisphere. And obviously, the people here, my children, my grandchildren, will be the beneficiaries of that policy. A much better, stronger United States, a much better and stronger Western Hemisphere. And with that, I'll let you go. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. God bless you all.
Yeah. So I'd like the Chile board members to please join me on stage for a photo with our congressional board member, Carlos Jimenez. Sarah, Jennifer, Honorable Ileana Ross, Layton, Javier Gamboa. ¿Quién me falta? I think that's it. Okay. Oh, there you are. You're in the green.
My
All right, so next is our first panel, so let me introduce the moderator. And before that, I also want to remind you that after the discussion, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions. Please make sure that when the moderator recognizes you, that you hit that little button on the right-hand side of that speaker. This is being live streamed and recorded, so we want to make sure that people who are listening or watching via live stream also have the opportunity to listen to your question. So again, only press that little button after you've been recognized. So, and now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's first discussion on trade on the Western Hemisphere, Eddie Acevedo. Thank you so much. He is the senior advisor. He is the chief of staff and the senior advisor to the president and CEO, Ambassador Mark Green at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Eddie is the principal advisor on national security and foreign policy matters and supports our policy and supports the policy development, external engagement, and internal management to the executive to execute the mission of the center and the CEO. He has spent over 15 years in public service at the intersection of domestic and foreign policy and advocates on behalf of U.S. national security objectives, democratic values, and international cooperation. Before he comes up and starts moderating the discussion, I also want to share that a couple of years ago, the Congressional Hispanic Leadership Institute signed a memorandum of understanding with the Woodrow Wilson Center because of Eddie Acevedo's support. We now have a partnership where they also host interns. About 3 years ago, they also held this forum, the International Trade Symposium. So a round of applause for Eddie. Thank you. Eddie will then introduce the panelists. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marianne, for the invitation to be with all of you today. I'm going to ask my fellow panelists if they can come on stage. Hey. It is so great to be here. It's always great to be with Chile. And I also have to give a shout out to who we call Nuestra Madrina, Ileana Ross-Latrin, who not only has done a lot for the South Florida community and also for the Hispanic community, but also for the U.S. When she was chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I had the honor of seeing firsthand world leaders who would come to the Congresswoman and her support in all matters relating to foreign affairs was great. And it really is special for the conversations we're having today, because a lot of the free trade agreements we have within the United States and Latin America would not have happened if it wasn't for Ileana's support. So thank you, Ili. So I have been told to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So I'm going to do that. We can start and go down the line.
All right. You know, I've tried many times to convince people who are introducing me to introduce me just as that guy from Walmart. So can I do that? I mean, I'm finally in charge. So I'm that guy from Walmart and I work with Sarah Decker, who you just met. And I'll talk a bit about my experience in Latin America, probably in answering questions. So I won't get into it here, but I did start my career in the Peruvian government and then moved to the US government. So it shows the natural connectivity, and now work for a company that I think sources 6-7% of the total ag exports from Peru and sends them around the world.
Hello, my name is Steve Clays. I'm with Pfizer, where I work on global trade and innovation policy. Basically engaging with governments both here in Washington D.C. and around the world on trying to foster the good, right environment to help encourage innovation of new medicines and making sure those medicines are available to everyone around the world. Pfizer obviously has serves many patients throughout all of Latin America. In my background, I'm actually it's a bit of a reunion here because Welby and I served together on the House Ways and Means Trade Subcommittee. And while we were there, we were often visited by Maria Luisa when she was at the Customs and Border Protection. And I just have to say, usually when federal agencies come up and meet with Congress, they're not very happy about it. But you're always so happy. And I always remember that, no matter the issue, which just made the meeting that much better. So anyway, really looking forward to giving comments later on and taking questions.
That's so nice. It's nice to see. I was surprised. Actually, the last time we saw each other probably was in Housewives and
Probably.
My name is Maria Luisa Boyce. I'm with UPS. I'm Vice President of Global Public Affairs. I'm a trade nerd. I'm that UPS person. I'm going to say that will be on that part. We work on a daily basis, of course, on moving goods across the world. We have 2%, we move daily 2% of the world's GDP in our network and 6% of the United States in our network. Actually, I'm sitting next to two of our customers, so I'm very excited to be here. I think my passion, I'm originally from Colombia. I grew up living in 5 different countries in Latin America, and I'm passionate about the region and also practical about it and some of the challenges that we face. So I'm excited about the conversation today and happy that Chile provides this panel to be able to have a conversation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all very much for being with us today. As a little bit of a scene setter for our conversation, couple of quick data points I wanted to point out. One, the United States is Latin America's largest trading partner, and trade has lifted about 1 billion people out of poverty worldwide. Those statistics come from the World Bank. For the United States, approximately half of all of our free trade agreements are within Latin America. And that has helped create, in 2022, goods and services of trade between the US and Latin America is $2.4 trillion. That's trillion with a T. And today now, Mexico has surpassed China as the US top trading partner. That is super important as number one, we have a new administration coming in Mexico next week, and with USMCA renewal coming up in 2026. A couple of things, I'm gonna say this a little bit more for the students. You're gonna get some homework for today, which is, one of the things that we talk about in terms of trade is recently, in August, I traveled a little bit throughout Latin America, but also in the US. I was in Arkansas and Kansas. And in both states, Mexico and Canada were the #1 trading partner for both states. And I think sometimes we forget about the impact that trade has. And one of the messages that we discussed with those audiences was pay attention to USMCA because it's up for review in 2026. So for a little bit of homework for everybody, I think next year being able to prioritize, as the Congressman said, GSP, the trade preferences is something that could be looked at. TPA, Trade Promotion Authority, a lot of acronyms in DC, you all get used to that. But also the HOPE Act for Haiti needs to be reauthorized. And one of the things that a lot of us are looking into is expanding potentially USMCA through an accession clause. So this was something that was in NAFTA that was never really used. And in USMCA, it was not included. But USMCA was and still is the most bipartisan free trade agreement in our nation's history. So we have so many countries who want to be part of that agreement. And as we talk about competition with the CCP, I remind folks that there's not enough foreign aid in the world through USAID, where I used to work, or through DFC. There's not enough money in those contexts that will compete with the Belt and Road Initiative. Ultimately, you need the private sector engaged and involved in order for us to compete. But in order for us to compete, as the Congressman said, we do need to offer an alternative. Just within Latin America in the last few years, we've had countries like Ecuador, Uruguay, ask the United States for a free trade agreement. The US didn't really respond to those requests, so therefore, they went ahead and did FTAs with China. And like those examples, there are many others around the world where similar things are happening. So while many people will complain about, hey, look what China is doing, I think a little self-reflection would be helpful on how do we get our own house in order so that we can be better in not only competing around the world, but offering that alternative to a lot of our allies. With that said, I'm going to move to some questions I have for the panelists, and then we'll move to questions from the audience. So the first question will be to all of you, and Maria Luisa, we'll start with you, and we'll go down the line. What do you think are some of the barriers that influence the hemisphere's ability to compete globally, and what sort of trade practices or policies do you think impact that global competitiveness?
So when I was thinking about this question, there's three words that come to mind for the Western Hemisphere. We need consistency, we need transparency, and we need, and I know well we will touch this rule of law on that part. And I think for the Western Hemisphere to be competitive, and from a business perspective, we're always looking at, do you have that consistency to do business, to be able to invest, and are you able to expand and to have, when you're investing in investments, sometimes for our companies mean many years. We're talking employment, you were talking supply chain processes, infrastructure. And so that's I think what the Western Hemisphere needs to look more at it. Sometimes it's challenging because you have in Latin America, sometimes the challenges of not consistent policies from one government to another. So when we look at investments, that's important. And when you're talking about trade, that matters. I think the US and Latin American trade policies, I do want to say, I love the statistics that you mentioned at the beginning. We see the amount of innovation, entrepreneurship that is in the region is amazing. There is a lot of opportunity. I think we need to really have a deep conversation in the region about how do we look at policies that made sense for everybody, and that everybody gets included, that have an opportunity to be part of international trade. So I'm giving you at the high level because I know we're going to get more into specifics, but in the region, we need to have those. That's where the transparency and the consistency come to play for trade to increase and be able to have more growth and economic growth.
Thanks. Well, first of all, I guess two things. One is that, the one thing that the COVID pandemic taught us is the link between health and competitiveness. And so, first of all, for a country, for a region to be economically competitive, you need to have a healthy population. So that speaks to the need for investment in health. And unfortunately, Latin America as a region lags the rest of the world in that respect. So, first of all, investment in health. And the second area is adoption of global good practices. And this kind of covers a whole range of things. Some of Maria Luisa mentioned, like rule of law, but also good regulatory practices, regulations that are streamlined, that are effective, they're transparent. Part of this is also good intellectual property laws and rules in order to enable innovation, in order to give companies confidence that when they go into a market and they invest in the market and make the product available in the market, that the innovation behind their products will be protected. But also, again, it's not just for the benefit of foreign companies, but it's also for the benefit of causing, enabling entrepreneurs within Latin America to do their, to have innovation and to be able to benefit from the innovation. And then, the last thing I just want to raise is digital policy. And I mean, you look up here and you'll see, you see Walmart, you see Pfizer, you see UPS. We're not big T tech companies, but we're small T tech companies. We all use technology for what we do. For Pfizer and for the biopharmaceutical industry, we rely upon cross-border data flows to conduct clinical trials, to make our medicines available, to collect data on the use of those medicines after they're available to patients. And none of that works if the data cannot be shared across borders effectively. Now, of course, there are concerns with privacy and other policy concerns which are quite legitimate, but they have to be weighed against the impact on health. And, if, countries right now, particularly again after the pandemic, are very keen on fostering their own life sciences industries. And they want to have, one way you do that is promoting clinical trials within your country. That's great, but no one's going to do a clinical trial in your country if you cannot get the data out of that country to share with scientists around the world. So, I think that's one thing that has to be kept in mind.
Walmart guy?
Thank you. I try to always do what Maria Luisa says. So she says I should do rule of law, so I'll do it. No, she knew that I would. I can't help myself. Huehuetenango, Guatemala, on the border with Mexico, the western border of Guatemala, saw 10% of its people leave, headed north in an 18-month period. And there are two principal reasons: rule of law and economic opportunity. And in particular, good rule of law in the United States and good economic opportunity here. So part of what is at stake in our partnership through this hemisphere is to work together to give people hope wherever they are. And that's why we care about rule of law so much. And the reason I mentioned both of those factors, the word root causes has sort of become political now, but the two root causes of migration is because they are entwined. They are inseparable. And if we're going to get it right, we can't be prioritizing early action on, let's say, the rule of law side in a way that prejudices economic opportunity. So what we need in particular is an agenda. And I have to just call out Senator Cassidy as like an especially great hero in this space. And he has co-sponsored with members Salazar and Espaillat, and then also Senator Bennett, the Americas Act. There is an understanding among them and many others that we need rule of law projects that in particular go upstream from the problem and say, hey, what are the regulatory systems, licensing and permitting, tax payment, other things that really matter. If you get them right, you make opportunity possible for the people who actually create jobs, who are disproportionately small businesses and are in our supply chain. And let's look carefully at the actual experience of people in those regulatory systems and use digital tools and other methods to make sure that those systems work so well, transparently, efficiently, resilient from traditional rule of law corruption failings and intentional scleroticism, so that people can. It may not immediately create massive numbers of new jobs, but I can tell you one thing: if you give Walmart its last permit to build a new store today, we will build. We will break ground tomorrow and hire a lot of construction workers and get that going. So I think that this migration debate should be understood not just in its own right, but also as an excellent way of our identifying from an existing problem how we can systematically solve for both rule of law and economic opportunity. And I have to say, not all the efforts of even the US government with regards to rule of law have worked. I mean, if you go into a place like Guatemala and just say, we're going to triple the number of prosecutors and set them loose, a bunch of those prosecutors are not going to be trustworthy. And for that matter, companies like Walmart are going to say, you know what, some of our suppliers that we developed with USAID we're now scared of, right? So that's why I push for a unified understanding of like those points where economic opportunity and rule of law come together rather than treating them as separate buckets.
Thank you. Maria Luisa, let me pick up on the supply chain that he mentioned. How can public-private partnerships drive competitiveness in the logistics and supply chain sectors within the hemisphere?
I think this is a very important question, and I have had the opportunity and through UPS and the UPS Foundation to work in the region working with micro and small and medium-sized enterprises. One challenge that the region has is informality. And I'll get to the supply chain and the private-public partnership, because there is a lot of informality. So many business owners are not part of the formal economy, therefore they cannot grow or export or take advantage of that supply chain or be able to access health benefits or be able to work or apply in other areas. And so that's where the private-public partnership helps, because the governments alone cannot do it, cannot reach out and solve the problem. That's where the private sector companies like ours partner with the governments to be able to do that outreach education. I do a lot of training in rural parts of the countries and in Latin America on how to become part of the formal economy so that your business can grow and you can expand the economy. And the government presence in some instances, because what Welby was talking about is very interesting. You are helping build a bridge for them to trust their government that they can be part of the formal economy. And that's something that for the economy in the region to work best, and for the supply chain to be able to grow, you need to have that formality and that understanding of where do you need the infrastructure, where do you need the mano de obra, oh my gosh, the employees available that you can be able to hire them, and then to be able to expand and grow on that area. So I think that private-public partnership is important. There's a lot of healing to do about how governments look at private sector and how the private sector look at governments. And I think that's something, it's a continuous journey, but we have to look, that's where it's very powerful, because it helps more reach out to all the members of the economy and the society.
And just following up on that, Steve, are there any sector-specific initiatives that can make supply chains between the U.S. and Latin America more resilient?
Yes. Thank you for asking.
Please
There are,
elaborate.
but one thing I just want to touch on, Ruth, on the informal economy. I just want to, one thing, make a pitch. And this year Peru is hosting APEC, which is an association of 21 governments, economies that go around the Pacific Rim. And one of their top priority initiatives is on the informal economy and how to formalize it, and which was, I found very interesting, because you're bringing in not only other Western Hemisphere APEC members like Mexico and Chile and obviously U.S. and Canada, but you're bringing countries like Vietnam and Singapore and economies like Taiwan, all talking about that issue. So I think that's quite interesting. But on supply chains, I mean, there are opportunities. I mean, we've had the history of kind of the big encompassing trade agreements that cover everything from agriculture to automobiles and everything in between. And that model, for whatever reason, is not very popular these days, particularly in the United States. But there are opportunities on sector specific. So one opportunity is known as the Medical Supply Chain Resiliency Act, legislation that's introduced both in the Senate and in the House by both Republicans and Democratic members of Congress. And basically what it would do is it would help create strong medical supply chains between the United States and other countries, entering into medical specific agreements, with countries that have, good rule of law, they have good IP, they have good regulatory practices, and then you would then enable through these agreements to lower barriers, be they tariffs or others, also to foster greater investment, to foster greater cooperation on research and development, and on other areas. So basically what this legislation does is it empowers the U.S. government, empowers the U.S. Trade Representative's Office to enter into these agreements with like-minded countries, and in turn strengthening supply chains in the medical areas, because obviously keep on going back to the pandemic, but obviously medical supply chains during the pandemic were shown to be how important they are, and what needs to be for them to be resilient to withstand shocks. And I will say that as much as we, focus on, there are, areas where supply chains not work out so greatly during the pandemic, frankly, 95% of the time or more, they actually were able to rebound fairly quickly in response to COVID. So, we need to keep that in mind. But anyway, that's a great example of, a sector-specific initiative that can help a very, very important part of the economy.
Well, and let me go to you. There's been a lot of talk around town about nearshoring, friendshoring. Not to mention, every few months we come up with a different term for this. But within the region, can you talk to us a little bit about, is Latin America taking advantage of this opportunity? There's been a big debate even within this construct. So much of the focus has been just on Mexico, and we tend to forget that really it's open to a lot of the countries with current FTAs, including Canada, Central America, the DR, Colombia, Panama, Peru, Chile. So tell us a little bit about sort of, is the region taking advantage of this, and what are some of the determining factors that you all look at to see whether or not this is going to be successful?
Yeah. Well, I'll pick up on Steve's COVID reference. In the pandemic, boy, could you ever see how important it is to have sourcing resilience, to be able to source from multiple places. And it is happening right now in a big, important, once in a generation, once every 2 or 3 generations sort of way. Let me be clear. What's the number one thing you don't want to do the day after you just build a really expensive factory? Move. Right. You want to use it. So like, when is the time to try to attract the factory? Before it was built somewhere else.
Yeah.
Don't, if you're Mexico, if you're Guatemala, don't flirt right now. Like, pop the question, because it's right now. And I would say there's a little bit too much flirting. I mean, I'm not against it secularly, but just so the. I think I'm going to actually tell a story that maybe doesn't even seem exactly an answer, but tell me what are, like, as students, like, issue spot and identify the key words here. So Walmart, as part of our development of a whole new set of suppliers, has done a ton of outreach into small business. We're doing road shows, we're doing open calls with thousands of folks applying to be new suppliers and so forth. And in part of that is as well using new digital tools to convene. Let's say we just recently we convened 1,300 small businesses in Mexico. Some of them are suppliers, some of them not yet are suppliers, and we had sort of iterative conversation in a way that you can have, like, person to person, but it's really hard to do it with 1,003 people at a time. But suddenly it's not, thanks to digital tools. And so we're experimenting with these tools in a way that brings people in. And what we were talking about is what's getting in your way. If you want to grow and be our supplier and build that new factory and bring something to Mexico or to Guatemala or to Peru or elsewhere, what's getting in your way? What's your experience with existing licensing and permitting systems, with tax and so forth? All that detailed lived experience that actually makes or breaks a business experience. And in that context, I'll just mention one person, Mariana Mercadillo, who just repeatedly in that conversation came up with really good ideas that other people in that 1,300 person cohort kept liking. So what do you know, when APEC, which Steve also mentioned, when APEC said, hey, do you have any small suppliers from Latin America who could come and talk about sort of this expansion of SME, micro, small, medium-sized enterprise opportunity? We said, well, we shouldn't pick. Why don't we let this cohort pick? And Mariana got picked, and they flew her to APEC, and she gave speeches there. And now she's working peer-to-peer to train other MSMEs, and for that matter, speaking probably more credibly than I could about to governments about what they need to do to help MSMEs. So what's the most important word in that story? I mean, there was digital tools, right? And I can tell you that's part of my answer. Let's like really use digital tools. Let's be a great region for digital transformation. I think Walmart's model is amazing because it combines physical and digital. That's sort of the natural way to have an inclusive on-ramp into the digital economy. You know, I mentioned there sourcing resilience and expansion of sourcing. So the most important word in that sentence was, in that story was Mariana. As a region, we have to be person-centered. What's the best way to beat some alternative system out there that is, highly invested in top-down thinking? It's to be person-centered. It's to recognize that throughout the Americas, we need to bring everybody online. We need to bring everybody into the system. We need to make our cross-sectoral partnership rooted in partnership all the way down to the grassroots. Let's get the dirt of Latin America to be fertile ground for small businesses right up into supply chain. Our cross-sectoral partnership should be rooted in that. And I see, I'll again mention Cassidy. I see in some of his work and others' work in Congress a real opportunity for that. There's peer-to-peer stuff that he's focused on. We need to invest in that now. It's the distinctive competency of this region.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much. We're going to take some questions from the audience. If you want to raise your hand. Yes. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Bianca. I'm a CHLI global leader, and my question is around sustainability. Where does trade and sustainability fit into Latin America? I've done some research about China and the result of Latin America and deforestation, so I wanted you to speak a little bit about that.
So maybe if I may start, and then I'll turn it over. For us, sustainability is very important. Imagine we're a transportation company. We have trucks, planes, automobiles. Sounds like that was a joke. Okay, everybody's sleeping, but we have a large footprint. We are very much committed about how do we invest and make certain that how we move the products is in the shortest route so that we have the less impact, and we're able to have and we're able to invest in the technology that allow us to have a better carbon footprint, right, in terms from that perspective. But also we are a healthcare logistics company, so we work very closely with our healthcare partners. We are involved in healthcare from clinical trial all the way to delivery to the patient. And so our facilities are very much a high standard for sustainability because our customers also require to make certain that we follow the standards, that we look and invest about the technology, the energy, how it's being used in that area. So trade is very much involved because you need to move trade, and that might create a carbon footprint, but at the same time, we're helping to do it in a way that helps the environment. Last but not least is the materials that we use to package the goods that move across the world. That's another way also that we look at a sustainability. So I'll turn over. They have better stories than we do. We're a transportation company, but we're giving our footprint. So
I don't know if I have better stories, but obviously, I mean, Pfizer is committed to sustainability and decreasing the company's overall carbon footprint. It's a challenge. I mean, there's some areas that are easier to address than others, and happy to partner with companies like UPS because obviously transportation is a big part of it. Also, I mean, I think well, just kind of stepping back, maybe taking my Pfizer hat off a little bit. I mean, there's been this portrayal of trade and sustainability being kind of at loggerheads or being either or, and oftentimes that's not the case. In fact, I think trade can have a very big role to play in increasing sustainability. I was talking about after the pandemic, a lot of countries and regions are suddenly interested in wanting to have their own, there's been a lot of talk about, well, if we need it, we got to make it here then. If we need this medicine, we've got to make it here. And there are a lot of reasons on why that does not make sense. And one of the reasons is sustainability. It's better to have flexible supply chains, with, with manufacturing, not in every country, but spread out in order to, one, is sustainable against things like, natural disasters. I mean, Pfizer, unfortunately, at one of its big facilities in North Carolina was hit by a tornado not too long ago. What happened? What would be the situation if that was the only one factory that made, this one medicine that people, depend upon? Fortunately, that's not the case. Pfizer was able to adjust to other facilities. So I think, just looking in the broader perspective of, trade can support sustainability. And, again, I'm looking at, working with partners. One of the things I actually was talking to some of our global supply experts, which I hadn't realized, that oftentimes, medicines are sent by airplane because they just need to get there where they need to be quickly, but also they're relatively light. And, but we're increasingly using ships because ships have a much smaller carbon footprint. There are some benefits, otherwise regulatory benefits like that to it, using shipping versus airplanes. So, when it works, we will go that way.
I know that we're just behind schedule a little bit, so if you don't mind, I'm going to take one more question from the audience, and I promise one more.
Walmart had a better answer for sustainability.
Go ahead.
Hello, hi, my name is CHLI. I have a question, actually a concern, talking about, we know that trade is not normal after COVID, and especially with sometimes China unlawfully trade practices and having being granted most favored nation status, competing with Latin America. And Latin America sometimes being seen as a backyard neighbor, which I think is very offensive, honestly. I think as a Latina, I think there's a lot of things that can be happened and can be done, as we mentioned, in Latin America and the Caribbean. Like, for example, in Puerto Rico, that they had all the pharmaceutical companies. What kind of policies and how do you see the trade administration with all the offices that have expanded to make it more effective for businesses and trade agreements to effectively take place, and for more minorities and Latin American people to get more engaged? I know that sometimes, as I forgot her name, she mentioned the bureaucracy can be a little bit intense for people to understand coming from Latin America, how Washington operates, and vice versa when you go to Latin America, because it's a little bit informal. What policies do you think can be in place to make sure that we can have more effective agreements that we can measure with Latin America and strengthen the hemisphere, which I think is important to bring more prosperity? And that is also, I believe, a matter of national security, because more people emigrate less if they have jobs in the hemisphere, and more companies like Pfizer, Walmart invest in the region effectively. What can we do to cooperate between the public and the private sector?
So,
Go ahead, Eddie.
yeah, let's go to Walmart first.
Well, I mean, yeah, let's have another panel right now, because this is a big,
sorry, I know it's a complex.
This is a big question. But I'll just mention one thing. You already mentioned the idea of grafting into existing trade agreements like USMCA, or the Peruvian and Colombian FTAs were originally going to be a regional FTA, including Ecuador, which is now interested. So there are real opportunities there. The ambition that I think many, both here and in the region, have is higher than what we're currently negotiating. And so we do need to raise our sights with regards to what's possible. Taking APEP for what it is, I would say, what would be a high ambition for APEP, even though it's not going to be a true trade agreement, like, let's say, the Peruvian and Colombian FTAs. We could go huge in APEP on capacity building, which is something that we did in CAFTA to prepare the CAFTA countries for trade agreements. Now, look, there are many Latin American economies, where we used to talk sort of condescendingly about, oh yeah, they're really great at following the American model. Now we know, no, they were following their own model, and it's really great. So I'm not saying that as that every country needs the US help. We all need to help each other. But I would go just huge on trade, services, facilitative trade, and many other capacity building projects in APEP, which isn't focused on trade liberalization, on reducing tariffs and so forth, but could do great stuff if we put a ton of time and resource into APEP. And I understand, again, the Americas Act to be pushing for that as well.
Can I just say, when I said informal, not informal of informal economy, meaning that there's a lot in Latin America. That's where we need to help them, to help elevate more parts of the population, is to through capacity building, through partnerships, to be able to make the case for many people from the population from Latin America to become part of the formal economy, so they can create a business that can then leverage the trade agreement on what is happening. That is not happening right now. That is a challenge. I think I will push back a little bit with your statement that actually the numbers of trade between Latin America and the US are very good. Puerto Rico is doing good. There's one thing that is missing in the region, and I will say it from a supply chain, and when you were asking about nearshoring and friendshoring, infrastructure is a challenge in the region, and having the roads that can connect to the ports, let it be seaport, airport, to be able to move the goods. That is the highest expense when you're exporting from Latin America into the US is the infrastructure. So there's also that need of making certain that there's that investment done in the areas in Puerto Rico, for example. We need to invest on the opening of our electricity, et cetera. There's other areas that are needed that we can work together and be able to make it happen. So thank you for the question, and we are.
So the last thing I would add to that is we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So when I was at USAID, we launched something called Prosper Africa. And what was Prosper Africa? If you're a business and you want to do trade overseas, a lot of businesses have to call about, 10 to 12 different departments around the government. And it's very time consuming and many times frustrating for the businesses to have to call state, commerce, and then even within those departments, there's many sub-departments. So we launched Prosper Africa. And the idea was that we get all of USG in one place. And the idea was a one-stop shop for the businesses in order to invest and promote two-way trade in Africa. However, Africa and the US have no free trade agreement. Yet, this is what we did. My own idea is something similar, Prosper Americas, in the context of everything needs to be coming together, right? So USAID needs to work on helping the enabling environments so that either on the end user, their exports can come into the US, or vice versa on the capacity building. MCC needs to help on infrastructure along with DFC. They can help on the infrastructure side because right now we don't really do infrastructure assistance overseas. So there's a lot of things that we can bring together working with the private sector so that, because all of them had different words on what they're looking for, but one of the ones I will add to that list is predictability, right? And we don't have that right now. So earlier I mentioned the HOPE Act with Haiti. Right now that has not been reauthorized. It's going to expire in a few months if it doesn't get reauthorized. But the businesses that are in Haiti right now cannot wait for that last minute to see if it's going to be reauthorized or not. They need to make a decision today about whether or not they're going to stay in Haiti. And like that example, there are many others where I think we need to get better at flexibility in terms of how the US government works. Speed is an issue because sometimes we will be helpful, but it just takes so long to get the engine moving. So there are many entities at play here, but I think that integration piece is something that's missing right now. Because in the US government perspective, we're so concentrated on this is your lane, this is my lane, turf wars and all that stuff. as opposed to saying, like, for example, if you're ever overseas and you look at US invested programs, you will probably see 10 to 15 logos of every US entity that helped in that. And if you are sitting in Colombia, right, do you care if it was USAID or DFC or MCC? No, you just care. It came from the US, period, from the American people, period, right? And being able to use those tools, I think it's an element that we have to get more creative, more innovative on our end to be able to provide those capabilities. And with that, thank you all very much. Please, a round of applause to our panelists. Taking a photo. Oh. Okay.
Okay, another round of applause for Eddie Acevedo and the panelists. Thank you so much. And now for the next panel, I want to welcome.
And don't believe anything Omar says.
And so for the next one, I'm going to introduce Omar. He will also introduce the panel. So Omar Franco is the Senior Director of Becker's Washington, D.C. office and heads their federal lobbying practice. He currently represents a wide variety of clients, including Fortune 500 companies, small businesses, higher education institutions, trade associations, nonprofit organizations, and municipal governments. Omar has been recognized as a hired gun in the Hill's annual list of top lobbyists since 2018. Man, that's a long time to be a hired gun. And in 2020 was named a top lobbyist by the National Institute of Lobbying and Ethics. Please join me in welcoming Omar Franco, also a CHLI board member. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Glad you can all make it here. We're going to be talking. I mean, we've actually, yes.
Get around, get you a fresh
Oh,
photo, 'cause I
okay.
think those-
We've actually been chatting, and I know we're now starting to run a little bit late. So, we're here to discuss the future of trade, especially in the Americas, and what that looks like. So, I think, well, first of all, I want to have Brad and Kelly, if you want to give your resumes. I've obviously mine has already been done for me. So, Kelly.
Yeah, I'll keep it short since we're running late. My name is Kelly Wicker, and I'm the director of the Science and Technology Innovation Program at the Wilson Center, where we work to make government faster, better, smarter at science and tech.
That was quick. I like that. So Brad Wood, I'm the Senior Director for Trade and Innovation at the National Foreign Trade Council. We work to promote a trade environment that fosters economic growth and innovation, ensuring American competitiveness equipped to succeed on the global stage. We represent a wide cross-section of U.S. and multinational businesses, all with a large U.S. presence. And I'm relatively new to NFTC. I joined from the Embassy of Canada, where I spent the last 11 years as the agriculture counselor and then leading the innovation and industrial program there. So as digital trade and technology reshapes America at NFTC, we're really looking for trade policy to shape and evolve along with it. So looking forward to this conversation today. Thanks, Omar.
So one of the things we were chatting about is, free trade, right? And what impact that has had in the Western Hemisphere, right? How it's changed things. So I just kind of, before we got into the main subjects, I just kind of wanted to open it up with that, because we do have some very prominent free trade agreements, and kind of just go, how did we kind of get here? And where do you see us going in the future, hopefully in the near future, with these free trade agreements? Kelly?
Well, to Brad first,
Yeah.
because my answer is going to be real tech heavy.
Well, so we just, we're talking about this behind in the green room. And, the reality is we're not looking at an ambitious trade agenda out of either administration. And so while we have cooperative agreements with a number of important economies in the Americas, it's unlikely that we're going to see a doubling down in the future. So we have to look at other initiatives where we can enhance our cooperation, look at what initiatives are on the table. There's the America's Partnership for Economic Prosperity with 12 of the countries in the region, but they still don't have some of the largest economies in Argentina and Brazil. So there is a need to definitely see where we can improve and do more. But in the absence of an ambitious free trade agenda, I think we need to look at trade facilitation, deepening the cooperation in the Americas, and how we can increase trade with the tools that we do have.
Okay. And so then how do we build a more resilient and diversified supply chain, Kelly? I mean, what would be some of the key factors in doing that?
I think, and going a little bit, going back to your first question about free trade too, I think one of the things we need to do is find ways we can leverage technology to remove some of the friction that of actually having trade between our countries, because if we're going to increase the amount of trade that we're doing, it should be easier to do it. And I'm thinking of things like the backups at the border between Mexico and the United States. If we're looking to friend shore, bring more industry to Mexico and increase how many goods and services are crossing that border, you should be able to cross that border without taking 5 hours of your day. You should be able to use tech to schedule a time to come across, or to facilitate people going through more quickly. The assistant secretary at DHS for science and technology is really wonderful. When he talks about this, he talks about if you have a lot of envelopes, you need to reinvent the envelope. Don't find better ways to scan the envelope, just change what the envelope is. And I think DHS has done a really good job with this approach. At least my experience of airports now is pretty seamless. You kind of walk through. I still allot too much time to be at the airport. So we need to do this for trade too. And how can we actually leverage tech? I know people love to say, oh, AI. Okay, what are we doing with AI? Are we using AI to predict trade flows and truck flows and plane flows so we can schedule staff properly according to those? Are we using AI to scan trucks more efficiently? What are we actually doing? And I think this is a conversation that we should be having jointly. The United States should not be unilaterally deciding how we will use tech to facilitate trade flows. We should have that discussion with Mexico, with Peru, with Argentina, and find out ways that this can be a win-win for both of us.
And just to build off that, the artificial intelligence is not there yet in terms of its engagement. We're looking at a looming port strike on the eastern US. It's going to have significant disruptions. Our members are already looking at all the auxiliary plans to bring product in from Mexico, from Canada, airship, create supply, backlog. So, as we run into some of these constraints, predictive analytics and AI has the ability to help solve some of these solutions, but it's really not there yet. What we need right now is, what we need is, trade facilitation agreements with the economies in the Americas. And where we're looking to increase trade, we can't rely on paper. I mean, the first thing is digitalization of a lot of these technologies. And we're not there yet. So you can't get predictive AI. You can't use blockchain when we haven't even got to getting past using paper with a lot of our trading and customs procedures.
Can I actually jump on that? Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm gonna butt in on you,
Yeah,
Omar. I actually was just talking earlier today with a company that helps American small and medium manufacturers digitalize. Like, we haven't even figured this out. And we were talking about this in the green room. What can the United States offer to people in the Americas? What can we give countries that will be a win-win for us? And I think this question of digitalization, we're solving it for ourselves. We're trying to figure out, how do you train small and medium enterprises? How do you help them find the tools that they need to digitalize? How do you help them understand what to do with that data once they have it? And these are all methodologies and training programs and practices that we can help other countries have. We're not losing anything by helping countries digitalize. It would make our lives easier too. And these are some of those things that we should be doing with our partners in the Americas to help just foster better relations, both economically and also just diplomatically. This would be huge, I think.
Right, because it creates a higher standard, and then everybody has to kind of deal with the same standard, and now it's apples to apples, right? Because right now it's two disparate systems, right?
And we can think about security if we're all jointly, if you digitalize and you don't think about cybersecurity, we're all going to have a real bad problem real quick.
Absolutely. And I mean, just picking up in 2022, we did a report with Third Way, that showed that, digitalization and trade facilitation could lead to 88 billion in export cost gains and nearly 1 million jobs, 987,000 jobs increased just in the US. And the job gains and the economic gains with the trading partners would be, equally robust. So it really is win-win. And to your mention of SMEs, our study showed that more than 70% of those gains would be by SMEs, and more than 50% to women-owned, to jobs provided to women.
Was that part of the polling you just did?
So the polling that we just did, that was a 2022 study, but
Okay.
we just launched a poll, results on, the importance of, digital leadership to the American population. And so we did a study with Morning Consult of likely voters this summer in July. And so I'll have to read the results, but 83% of voters agree that it is important that for the United States to develop a digital trade agenda that helps American workers enter and effectively compete in overseas markets. 82% of voters are concerned that foreign regulators are advancing policies that discriminate against U.S. businesses. And 71% of voters are concerned that U.S. is falling behind China when it comes to technology innovation. And so there was a number of other, questions and results coming out of this poll. But overarching, the important thing is we need digital leadership from the next administration. No matter who prevails in November, there's a real opportunity to increase the engagement. We're seeing a lack of leadership on digital policies when it comes to all the attention that we're paying on artificial intelligence, for example. It's, the U.S. is leading critically when it comes to AI, when it comes to, the voluntary commitments here in the U.S. There was just an announcement of $100 million yesterday to support developing countries with their own AI adoption. This is terrific. At the same time, we need the U.S. to be engaged in writing the rules of the road on
Right.
digital
The guardrails.
technologies.
Yep.
The guardrails.
Yep. Yeah, and on the AI, it's funny because everybody focuses on predictive or generative AI, but there's this huge market on industrial AI, right? And industrial AI is that's the one that's really leading the charge and squeezing efficiencies out of the system. So it's one of the things I work on. So, but how else, Kelly? Obviously there's a lot of less advantaged communities down there in the Americas. I mean, what policies, are you working on or do you see could possibly, I know you mentioned some, but are there any other ones that you see that we could possibly be doing down there?
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of policies that we should be doing here for our rural communities actually as well. But number one is get people online. There's a lot of pockets of different countries of our own country that are left without access to the internet. So get people online. Get them a device. Do they have something that they can use online? Do they have a phone? Do they have a laptop? Do they have the actual device that corresponds to what they want to do with the internet, with technology? Third is literacy, digital literacy. Is there a training program that can help them harness technology and understand what it can do for them in whatever field they work in or in schools or whatever? And then from there, you start to get more complex. Like, do researchers have access to compute? Do they have access to data? Do they have access to AI models? But really, it's those first three. Do you have connectivity, device, literacy?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the access to compute, I just want to pick up on. I think there's a big push for every country to develop their own cloud computing capacity. Really, with cloud, if we don't have data localization policies, if we have open cross-border data flows, AI is really a proxy for a lot of the digital development rules that we need to focus on. And if done right, the U.S. can be a leader in generative AI technologies, but also a lot of the same companies are the cloud giants, and they have made the technology open to countries around the world. And so it has the ability to really uplift, countries in the Americas.
Yeah. The only one I would add is microloans, because now what made the phone so revolutionary is that now for the first time, like, you don't need a business, right? Your phone becomes your bank, like where you do business, and then microloans become, now you can track it because you can, as they can build credit up, something that in many countries was like virtually unknown. So, I think that would be, I'd throw that in there.
Well, and not only microcredit, but access to payments.
Right.
And so, the payment processors and access to digital payments is really empowering for SMEs.
Yeah. And then so everybody who knows me knows that I got to talk about China a little bit, so GAO, hot off the presses, September 12th came out with a report that the Belt and Road Initiative, they did an infrastructure projects over, what was it, like 12 years or so? It was over a significant period, $679 billion of projects across the world. In the meantime, the United States did about 76 billion in contrast. So one of the things we were kind of talking about, and we could keep it generic, but if there's not going to be movement on the free trade side, what can there be movement on? And I know you've touched on it, but there has to be, because and anecdotally, I think you had a great story about Ethiopia and what they're doing, and what is the solution? Because obviously, a lot of projects are being done in the Americas with Chinese dollars. And I know for a fact that they would rather see the U.S., right? And so what can we do there?
Yeah, so when in 2010, I was in Ethiopia doing field work, and they were telling us about the Chinese had just come in and built a mine for one of the components of concrete, and the Chinese brought in their own workers to build it, brought in their workers to run it, brought in their own workers to run Chinese restaurants for the people who were working and living there. And then once they got all the minerals out of the ground, they left, and all that was left was a hole in the ground and a bunch of empty buildings. Ethiopia really got nothing out of that. And the president at the time, Meles Zenawi, somebody asked him, they were like, what did you expect? They could do this. This has happened repeatedly around the world. And he was like, well, my options were nothing from you, or see what happens with this Chinese agreement. And he wanted to see what would happen. And I think that really just demonstrates how absent the United States has been for so many partners around the world, so many would-be partners around the world. And particularly in Latin America, we were talking about this before we came on here, is we have been for decades extremely absent to our friends in the South. So number one, I think, would be we need to recognize the importance of showing up. If Belt and Road is going to be so successful, if Huawei is going to sell their technology by showing up and caring, even if they're exploitative, you're going to buy it anyways, why don't we just show up?
Yeah.
I think, the study, the window looked at until 2023. And so certainly that didn't pick up a lot of the investments in the IRA, a lot of the investments in the CHIPS and Science Act. And so the US is making up a little bit of lost time here within the US. In the Americas, I was in Peru over the summer at APEC and meeting with Peruvian authorities locally. And, China had come in and built the port. And everything you're saying is, they just did not have a choice to finance their new port other than to accept Chinese funding. And so there does need to be, alternatives. What that policy prescription is, I will, somewhat leave that to the next administration. But I will point out, one proposal that's out there is, Brian Deese, the former NEC director, issued a long piece in Foreign Affairs for a clean energy Marshall Plan. And he really proposes to look at all of the investments the U.S. has made in the CHIPS and Science Act, in the IRA, and how to invest and help promote those as development assistance around the world. And so he proposes a clean energy finance authority. He proposes more work across the Americas. And so I really think that, if we were to see a Harris administration, that could be a proposal that we see advanced.
Yeah. Well, since Eddie Acevedo spoke so much, we've run out of time here. But we can take maybe a question or two if anybody has a question. Yes. We can hear you. We'll repeat the question.
I think one of the things I always think about with this question is, the companies that are building data centers in Latin America that are problematic are the same companies that are building data centers in places like Finland and Germany. And the ones that they are building in European countries adhere to European climate standards. They are efficient. They have 98% of their power is coming from renewable sources. I don't know what the status is on their water usage, but I assume it is probably better than what they are building in Vietnam or in Uruguay. And so I think, I don't know how you do that. How do you incentivize and or bring out the stick for corporations? They can build cleaner data centers. How can we get them to do that everywhere and not just the countries where they're forced to? At the same time, I'm cognizant that a lot of times when we come in with our grand sweeping climate desires, countries are like, hey man, I didn't ask you what you thought about this investment. I need you to leave. And so there's a weird tension there because especially like the one in Uruguay that Google was going to build, I think it's currently on pause because there was so much outcry about it. So clearly the Uruguayan people are not in favor of this data center, but is the Uruguayan government prepared to scuttle it? Probably not. There's a lot of money on the table. So what is the role of an outside government like the United States? I don't know.
I don't know either, but I think the piece is, the governments are still asking for this. And so that is a challenge within a lot of these countries. But I think part of the result is every country does not need its own domestic data center without data localization policies, with open cross-border data flows. You can put the cloud compute where it's needed, where it makes the most economic sense, where it makes the most environmental sense. And the access, if you have the proper, fiber frameworks, can be accessible around the world. So we don't really need, cloud in every economy in the Americas.
And actually, let me one more thing on that. That reminded me, the countries that have demanded clean data centers, clean compute, one thing that I think can be really useful is to remind people, you don't know where the compute you're using came from. So if you genuinely care about the climate commitments that you have made and how your use of AI and cloud compute is affecting the climate, all data centers need to be up to a certain standard because your compute demands are sometimes coming from Turkey. They're sometimes coming from Brazil. They're not necessarily coming from the clean one in your country.
Right. So as we set these clean standards, remember, there's countries out there that have no OSHA, no EPA, none of these things, right? So they don't have any restrictions. So they can build these data centers ad nauseum without any restrictions. They can basically build them all day, every day, and that's the bigger problem, right? So there has to be a balance. I think we're trying to find the right balance, but it's going to take a little while, just because. And by the way, as soon as you build a data center, like 2-3 months, more technology comes into play, and so it's constantly advancing. It's one of the things that data centers from like 10 years ago are virtually obsolete now because the new ones do 100 times more capacity. So that's what's going on. Any other question? I saw one more. Yes.
Chinese best. Chinese flying now would actually be 99% sure that will happen, right?
Well, I'll let go, Brad.
I mean, I'll just say quickly, I think the pendulum has swung on, our geostrategic and geopolitical concerns. And so, yes, there are concerns around ports. Yes, there are concerns around, competition with China. But I think we need to look at, rules-based trade. How do we return to, ensuring that de-risking doesn't mean decoupling, ensuring that we're containing those risks, because ultimately, it is a very interconnected world, especially with logistics.
Yeah, and it's completely changing the supply chains. I mean, COVID in many ways did us a favor in that it showed where the flaws were, right? And it showed it significantly. So now, let me tell you, I mean, who was talking supply chain before COVID, right? No one, right? So now new words such as de-risking and friend-shoring, onshoring, nearshoring, all that. So it has to be a comprehensive strategy. And, I work with companies that right now, their main focus, I will guarantee you, and these are big companies, little by little, they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I start moving away from China and what does that look like? So it's going to be slow. It can't be done in a year, but it's starting to happen. And, there's always a tipping point, right? You got to start somewhere. So maybe in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, but it is going to happen. And we are de-risking, right? That's the word du jour. We'll call it something else in like 4 years, right? Or something, but that's where we're going. So, all right, I think that's the end of our panel. Just come with a sidebar. I'm getting the hook from the boss. So,
Thank you. One more round of applause for the panelists. We have our last and final speaker coming up. Go ahead without me, just so we can, no, Omar, just a picture, the group. Yep. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and then after that, we will wrap up, and hopefully all of you here in person can join us for conversations with the speakers, other panelists, and our reception on the rooftop. So please join me in welcoming Daniel Watson. He is the Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for the Western Hemisphere and is responsible for U.S. trade policy with Latin America, the Caribbean, Mexico, and Canada. He has 19 years' experience at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative in a range of policy settings, including serving as a Deputy Chief Negotiator for the USMCA. Somebody mentioned to me earlier that we've had a day full of acronyms, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, as well as the trade relations with Southeast Asia and services trade negotiations at the World Trade Organization. Please join me in a warm welcome to Daniel Watson.
Oh, good afternoon. I think you've been talking about trade for several hours. So it's great. And I think I'm the last person, I think you're the last thing before your networking event. So I'm going to treat this more like a briefing rather than a speech. And if there's a little bit of time, we can have some questions. So I think most of you probably know what USTR is, but just as a reminder, because I like to say it, USTR is a small, highly specialized agency within the Executive Office of the President. We are responsible for developing and coordinating U.S. trade policy. And as part of that responsibility, we negotiate, implement, and enforce trade agreements. And as was mentioned, I lead the Western Hemisphere office, and I cover everything from Tierra del Fuego to Alaska. So it's a very good moment actually to reflect on where we are on trade with Latin America. So the reason for that, we're at the end of the Biden administration. A lot of things have happened in the last 8 years on Western or Latin American trade policy. And obviously we're looking at a lot of changes coming up. So next Tuesday, Claudia Sheinbaum will be inaugurated as the new president of Mexico. We will have an election in about 6 weeks, and sometime between now and October, we will have a new prime minister in Canada. That has a lot of implications for at least one of the things I want to talk about, but we're really looking at a period where there's going to be a lot of fundamental questions that need to be asked and changes that need to take place. So when I look at the Western Hemisphere, I would just remind you, we have FTAs with a very large part of the hemisphere. So we have most of US FTAs are in Latin America. It is in the Western Hemisphere that the network of US trade agreements was born and developed, and the precedents were set in this region. So we have FTAs with Chile, Peru, Colombia, Panama, the countries of CAFTA DR, Mexico, Canada. The only countries in the hemisphere that we could even conceivably have FTAs with, and we don't, are the 4 countries of the Mercosur, so Brazil, Argentina, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Ecuador, who unfortunately dropped out during their negotiations. But all that to say, when we think about our trade relationship with Latin America, a lot of the work has been done. So we essentially have in the Western Hemisphere very close to duty-free trade. Between our agreements with those countries, between their agreements with each other, the tariff box has mostly been checked. Of course, there are exceptions. There's AD/CVD actions and that sort of thing. But in general, some of the basic elements of trade are already done with Latin America. And so what that means is when we think about deepening our engagement economically, we have to look elsewhere. There are certain gains that have already been gained, and we can't get them again. So we have to look at non-tariff barriers. We need to look at regulatory issues. We need to look at increasingly talking about building supply chains. But it's really that space of regulatory cooperation, of building rule of law, creating the best environment for investment, which is what's lacking in our agreements with the region. So I'm going to focus on two things because once we get to 2025, these are the things that will be the most important for either administration, depending on who they are. So the first one is important just because it involves Canada and Mexico. They are our largest trading partners. They are our border partners. They're always going to be critically important. The first thing that the new incoming administration will have to wrestle with is the 6-year review of the USMCA. So this is something I've not talked about until this month because everybody's gotten very excited about it way too early. But the reality is next year we do need to get serious. So what that means is, as some of you will know, there's a provision in the USMCA that requires a review every 6 years. So July 1, 2026, we will have to affirmatively tell each other whether we want to continue with this agreement or not, and if there are changes that need to be made. So about 1 year from now, in October, we will begin our domestic process, which is set in the implementing legislation. We will give notice to the Congress of our intent and what we intend to do. We'll do a Federal Register notice. There'll be public hearings. There'll be a big discussion about what this process will be. That's all set in law, and those are things that will happen. Before we get to that, so starting in January and before we get to October, the incoming administration will need to decide what do we want out of that process. And that could be a wide range of things. So on one extreme, it would be don't rock the boat, check the box, say that we're done, 6-year review is over. The other is completely renegotiate the agreement, hold it up, rattle the cage, make sure we totally change things. So, look, we will find out what the traffic will bear under the new administration. But my expectation is that things will fall somewhere in the middle. But there are some problems in our relationship. So we have this great new agreement that is, as I say, our top trading partners. There are certainly successes, but there are things that we already know are problems, and there are things that will develop between then, and there are things that we can't know about. So anyway, as we're looking at the USMCA in North America, I just want to flag the good things about it because you'll probably hear a lot more bad things. But it's a gigantic amount of trade. It flows very, very smoothly for the most part. Some of the innovations of the USMCA have clearly been successful. We processed 28 of the rapid response mechanism cases for labor. That was, one of the critical things that got the agreement passed, and that's been working well. We also have a competitiveness chapter where we are building new ways to cooperate with each other in a way that we didn't under the NAFTA to improve North American competitiveness. That's something we're going to continue to build on. But there are very significant enforcement actions. So whether that's energy or dairy with Canada, energy with Mexico, fisheries issues with Mexico, and also the litigation against the United States on the autos rules of origin. These are all really important and still unresolved issues. So the litigation is ongoing. The consultations, continue on how to resolve them. There are new things that are likely to come. When we look at the some of the constitutional reforms proposed in Mexico that could move forward, we could end up with more enforcement actions before too long. So those issues will probably be the center of what we need to talk about in the 6-year reform and the 6-year review. But of course, Canada and Mexico will bring their own issues. There's a separate box of issues that will also come up that are not so much about compliance with the USMCA, but about where we want North America to be in the global economy. And so when we talk about nearshoring and building resilience in supply chains, and that's focused on those two countries, a lot of that is geopolitical. A lot of that is directed against our competition with China. And there will be a lot of discussion about which sectors need more cooperation. So the range of things that could potentially come up in this review are quite large. I guess what I would say about that is there's going to be a lot of public discussion, and for those of you who are working for congressmen, I suspect you'll have a lot of interest in this. People really need to think through what they want. I know that we've already, I know the, I think industry in Canada and Mexico are quite terrified of this process. I think, here as well. But really, people should start thinking now about how we're going to manage this because this is going to be really important. The second issue that we're going to be preoccupied with is the Americas Partnership for Economic Prosperity, a major new initiative of the administration. Lots of debate about how valuable it is, but I'm going to make the case for it. So the Americas Partnership has three tracks. So there's a trade track, which is led by USTR. There's a foreign affairs track led by the State Department. There's a finance track, which is led by Treasury. So based on what I said earlier, recognizing that we need to do more with Latin America, we want to have a stronger, more integrated economic relationship with the countries of Latin America. A lot of things have already been done, and we can't go back and do them again. We really have to go to those places that offer new opportunities, and that really is the regulatory space and the NTBs. So what we have done in the region over the last 4 or 5 years is really to focus on the most recent high-level provisions in the USMCA and then bring them to the region. So things like trade facilitation, good regulatory practices, which include things like transparency and long-term regulatory planning, the anti-corruption provisions in the USMCA, the chapter on small and medium enterprises that go to bringing a more inclusive aspect to our trade engagement. We have done that in protocols with Brazil. We negotiated essentially several chapters in a protocol with Brazil. We did the same things with Ecuador. And we're bringing many of these things to the Americas Partnership. So this is where we need to go. Whether we do it through the Americas Partnership or we do it in our structures that already exist in our FTAs or we negotiate new agreements, this is the place that's left to us to sort of build closeness with our partners. So on the Americas Partnership, I think most of you know what it is, but just to remind you, the initial participants are Canada, Mexico, Barbados, Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, Panama, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, and Uruguay. It's going to have an open architecture. You'll hear a lot of discussion next year about bringing in new members possibly, but that's already a very substantial chunk of this initiative. So I'm going to say just a couple of other things about the Americas Partnership. So the FTAs that we have in the region have worked really well at what they're designed to do, which is to create more trade and investment. However, we still have a lot of income inequality in Latin America. We have a lot of institutional weakness. We have a lot of rule of law problems. We have democratic backsliding. Trade agreements don't fix every problem. And in order to really bring a lot more prosperity and development to Latin America, there are lots of things that have to happen outside of a trade agreement. So in the Americas Partnership, there's at least the opportunity in the foreign affairs track to really push for some of those issues and make changes in those areas outside of the trade space. The finance track is intended to mobilize additional investment in the hemisphere, which will be necessary to make those changes. In principle, this should all be organized and function in a way that would have a more holistic impact on the countries of Latin America. But on the trade space, I'm just going to highlight some of the things that we are doing. We have established Council on Trade and Competitiveness, which is essentially the senior officials body in that partnership, similar to what we have in the APEC. Under that, we have several committees. One is on trade rules and transparency and focusing on things like trade facilitation, good regulatory practices, standards, anti-corruption. A lot of things can be done in that space. We have a committee on inclusivity and SMEs, a committee on value and supply chains, and then recently we established committees on labor and environment. So we have a very extensive set of committees, which in principle should be able to mobilize the partner countries to take useful action and implement them. So this is not a binding trade agreement, that's true. It's not going to have the enforcement mechanisms of a trade agreement. That's a drawback, but it's also an advantage. There are many things that countries won't agree or even try to do if they're subject to dispute settlement. Having dispute settlement is great when you're all in agreement and you have a mechanism for enforcing it, although we've seen that simply winning a case doesn't always lead to enforcement. But for the partnership, these sort of cooperative activities that would be undergirded by capacity building and financial support can be very useful. So in the CTRT, the Committee on Trade Rules and Transparency, for example, we've taken trade facilitation as one of our work programs. And the idea there is to look at the trade facilitation agreement in the WTO and seek the maximum implementation of that agreement, the best possible implementation. So we were working with the Global Alliance on Trade Facilitation and the IDB. We had a very large event in Bogota in July. We brought in private sector from all the countries, government officials from all the countries, customs authorities and trade people to sort of talk through what the best standards would be for implementing certain provisions in the TFA. This will be an annual process. So every year we will have an event like this. We will publish the outcome of this discussion, these sort of best practices for implementing these provisions. And then the idea would be for individual countries to put together implementation plans, which again, we can work with IDB or USAID or other bodies to implement them. I will flag one thing that we did do for the ministerial meeting. We had a ministerial meeting in Quito on August 1st. We did negotiate a declaration on pre-arrival processing. This is a sort of a best practices model for implementing the pre-arrival processing obligation in the TFA. This is the sort of thing that we've done in APEC and it's often been very useful and can set the stage for more elaborate obligations later in trade agreements. So I'm actually quite bullish on this aspect, on the trade track at least, of the Americas Partnership. I think there's a lot that can be done there, and I will just flag too that we have had very good uptake from the member countries. So Chile has really stepped forward and taken a lot of responsibility for organizing some of the TF work. Ecuador as well remains a very good partner. You know, not everybody is ready to do a lot, but it's only the first year. The first year is about institution building, setting the agenda, getting people socialized with what we need to do. So if this moves forward next year the way we hope it will, it does have the potential to become something really great. So the other thing I'm going to say about these two initiatives, you know, obviously there's a lot that we don't know. Depends on who the president will be. The 6-year review will have to happen one way or another. That's part of the agreement. The Americas Partnership is a Biden-Harris administration initiative. It's not so different from initiatives you might have seen in the past, like America Crece and others, at least in its conceptualization. So I think even, you know, we'll see what happens if there's a Trump administration, but I think one way or another, something like this is going to continue. Maybe it'll be repackaged and renamed, we don't know. But I think our future on trade discussions with Latin America is really going to be in this space because we've done the FTAs. So these are the two things that I think are going to be most important in trade policy and USTR work, regardless of who is elected. But I do want to flag a few other things too. So there are significant problems in the region that are going to affect our trade agenda. And democratic backsliding is one of the major ones. So the situation in Nicaragua is problematic for a lot of perspectives, but it's really undermined the functioning of the CAFTA-DR. So that agreement is really critical and fundamental to the ongoing prosperity of the partner countries. But it has been impossible to really have the committee work and the other sort of work that we need to do to keep that agreement moving forward when we have that situation in Nicaragua. Honduras, I don't think we know for sure where that's going to land either. But these are all things that we have to consider. It's going to raise questions about the viability of the CAFTA-DR in the future. And we already hear that from the Congress, and we hear that from others as well, too. So I flagged that because this is going to be a big question that we'll have to deal with in 2025. The other issue is going to be what we do with some of the non-FTA partners. So we do have trade and investment framework agreements with those countries we don't have FTAs with. Those traditionally have been kind of passive agreements, but we've been much more active and negotiated actual disciplines in those. I think there's a lot of opportunity with Uruguay and Paraguay, perhaps with Argentina. I don't know that Brazil's terribly interested at this point, but who knows? But, you know, once you start engaging in that way, you're really covering pretty much the whole hemisphere. And I think as the partnership grows as well, we have been, if nothing else, in the last 5 or 6 years, we really set ourselves up for the possibility of enhanced engagement with the region. So there'll be a lot of follow-up to do next year, but I'll leave it there. Those are the top things that we'll be doing at USTR. If you have any questions, I have a few minutes. I could answer them. Otherwise, I know you have something else to do too. But if there are a couple of questions, I'm happy to take them.
Hi, Jorge Restrepo with Eureka Facts. Is there or kind of what is the outlook in terms of common position on data privacy and data sharing for the hemisphere so that we don't end up with a hodgepodge of things all over the place?
Yeah, okay, so the thing I didn't say that I will just say very briefly is there are a number of important trade issues like that, like artificial intelligence, that are going to require a clear consensus in the United States about what our position is. And I don't think that we have that yet. Traditionally, what we do with other countries, what we promote in terms of standards are based on the US standard. We basically ask everybody to do what we think is right in pretty much every context. Until we really land on those places and there's a clear consensus in the US Congress on those sort of issues, we won't be in a position of doing anything too aggressive in that space. So, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm a consultant and I've been in a trade space for a while, international trade space. So my question is about like the human side of the trade. You mentioned that there are some problems in trade agreements that they cannot solve in the international space. So I was like wondering, are there any best case facilitation practices USTR ever endorsed or planning to endorse? Thank you.
So we have not, in the past, we have not weighed in on those sort of elements of economic capacity building that are not, strictly speaking, trade. And it's not actually our role or our statutory mandate, where we're really there to negotiate the agreements and implement and enforce them, coordinate trade policy. But again, we do have many agencies that do attend to all of those things. And we do care about them quite a bit. I mean, it's definitely been one of the focuses of the Biden-Harris administration is to look at how economic development in these partner countries is challenged, even when there are certain benefits associated with trade. I do think, just speaking personally, I think the government needs to do a better job of that. But again, going back to the Americas Partnership, there's been a real effort to bring in the development banks and to sort of think a little bit more holistically. You know, there are educational needs in Latin America and the United States. There are many things that need to be improved if we're going to really take advantage of the openness that we've negotiated. So that's going to be an ongoing discussion. If you have ideas for best practices, you can let us know.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All righty. Well, thank you.
Hang on, just pause here. Don't leave yet. You can pause for a photo. But another round of applause for Daniel. Thank you so much for giving us that great perspective on things. I'm going to also welcome everyone to join us for reception, networking. If you can just please exit out to your right. The CHLI team will help escort you up to the rooftop, back through the elevators and into the rooftop for the reception. Again, thank you all very much and wishing you all a great Hispanic Heritage Month. Thank you.